Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, good evening, everybody. We're just going to give everybody a couple more minutes to trickle in. We'll be starting in at about 7:03. Okay, Tony, I think it's about that time.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Tony Vergnetti, the president and founder of Feds Protection, and I am delighted to be here with you this evening in partnership with GEBA to provide you a little information about professional liability insurance for federal employees. As a former federal employee myself and an attorney that has represented federal employees for years, I founded Feds over 14 years ago on this platform of education because I really believed I could run a program, start a program that did right by federal employees. And it is in that spirit that, that Feds has partnered with GEBA these past several years. GEBA is one of the premier federal employee associations for us to provide our PLI to GEBA members at an exclusive and reduced rate. So here I want to kick it back to Greg and let him tell you a little bit more about GEBA. He's obviously my co-host for this evening. Greg Klingler is the Director of Wealth Management for GEBA. So Greg, I'll kick it back to you.
Thank you, Tony. My friends in the marketing department asked me to just quickly come on and kind of put PLI in a wealth management financial planning perspective. We talk a lot about PLI and we talk about how it's good for federal employees. But really, what does that mean, and how does it kind of influence the rest of your financial plan? Because at the end of the day, the goal here is and always will be, okay, how are we going to best serve our needs? How are we going to best serve our family needs? And how are we going to position ourselves to do that? So that's generally the goal. So I'm going to take about 5 minutes or so and just put it into the idea of protecting yourself from a professional liability standpoint into your wealth management or your financial plan. As Tony mentioned, my name is Greg Klingler. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at GEBA, as well as the Director of Wealth Management. And at Wealth Management, we have about 1,600 what we would consider to be members or clients. And to be a member or a client is somebody who either helped to invest, we've done financial planning for them, and we've got them on the road to hopefully retirement success, or we've gotten them through the retirement process into a successful retirement. That's how we define a client or a member on our side. And when people think about financial planning, what do they think about? Well, wealth, investments, portfolios. But really, that's only one side of the financial planning. The other part is risk mitigation, understanding the financial risks standing in between you and your goals, and making a conscious decision whether to retain that risk, i.e. self-insurance, or to outsource the protection, in most cases, to effectively buy an insurance policy. Now, we all know why people buy auto insurance or home insurance. It's because, well, you have to. Legislatively, you're required to buy auto insurance. Homeowners insurance is required by a mortgage company. But what insurance do people choose to retain because it's the right thing for them? In many cases, the decision is based on cost versus perceived damage. What is the largest perceived damage that most people consider? And that is the loss of their income. So along this vein, we see a lot of people looking at life insurance or long-term disability insurance. Those are really commonly held insurances because they protect against the loss of your income for your family or for yourself. But then what about liabilities? I have seen a lot of people who've made very good financial decisions suffer what you would consider to be a complete financial collapse because they were not protected from liabilities. And let me just give you a personal example that we've run into, and we ran into pretty recently at GEBA. We had a husband and wife. They're both in their early 70s. They had done everything right. They had worked probably a couple years longer than they needed to. They had saved a couple of $100,000 more than they probably needed to. They were well on their way to a very comfortable retirement and well on their way to leaving quite a bit of assets to their children. And then an accident happened. And in this case, it was an automobile accident. The wife ran into somebody, didn't break any laws, wasn't speeding, didn't run any stop signs, but ended up disabling a 35-year-old gentleman. And at that point, the liability of that accident, because she was effectively at fault, took into account they had to actually care for this person for the rest of their life. They had to effectively replace the income that this person would have earned because they were disabled. And what was once a very good financial plan was now a financial plan that was pretty much void of a lot of assets, with the exception of what they had in the retirement plans. This is one of the reasons why when we work with wealth management, we talk about umbrella policies, protecting against liability above and beyond auto insurance and homeowners insurance maximums. Because if you have something to protect, buying insurance to protect that is very, very important. So I've been very, verbose in this introduction, but this does take me to my final point. Many federal employees forget about an insurance that protects against the loss of your income, which we've established people want to do, protects you from potential liability from the actions on your job, and in many cases is subsidized by your employer, your agency, your department. And that coverage is the topic of today's conversation, professional liability insurance. We at Wealth Management, when we look at the potential subsidy, what it protects from an income standpoint and what it protects from a liability standpoint, we find that it makes sense for almost all federal employees to, at the very least, entertain this insurance as part of your insurance portfolio because it can make a lot of sense. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic back over to Tony. He's going to walk you through the ins and the outs of GEBA, partnered with Feds, professional liability insurance plan. Tony.
So thanks, Greg. Great introduction. I'm actually going to go a little off script because you reminded me of something there, but also remind you to give me control of the webinar so that I can
Right.
run it.
Should have it now.
No. There we go. So the went too far. So a little bit off script there because your introduction just reminded me of this. It's something I always say because a lot of financial planners would tell you, look, if there is any exposure that you have in general that you can insure away at a relatively low cost, which this kind of insurance is, you should always do so, even if the probability of you needing the insurance is relatively low. And I'm going to put that kind of in numbers. So you can buy, you'll find out how inexpensive this insurance is as we get going through our presentation, but you can buy the insurance for your entire career, right? Entire 20, 30-year career. And you would have spent probably like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 of your money and never need it. And just really had, you know, the peace of mind that it was there. And then, you know, that's not going to change your standard of living when you retire. But if you have to pay an attorney, you know, $100,000, $200,000 of your hard-earned money, that is going to change your standard of living when you retire. That could matter, you know, what kind of car you get and where you live. So, you know, that's a little bit me going off script here. So I want to get back to the presentation. And I'm going to actually take myself off camera so that we could, you know, just focus on the slides here. Hope that's okay with everybody. So I always like to start the presentation with the spotlight because it is often, you know, the average everyday federal employee that is placed in the spotlight with the latest case or controversy of the day. You know, what would you do if you became the face of the next case or controversy? So whether it's, you know, dealing with the pandemic related matters or the controversy of the day, we at Feds Protection have been at the center of almost every major event impacting federal employees. So I'm talking from Waco to 9/11, the wars, torture investigations, congressional investigations involving IRS, GSA, ATF, the VA, most recently the impeachment proceedings. You know, the insurance has been there every step of the way to help protect federal employees. So in essence today, you know, what we want to do is kind of draw upon these experiences for you and tell you what you can expect if you find yourself, you know, under the spotlight. Often your exposure as a federal employee is dependent upon special interest, lobbying agendas, media attention, and as GEBA members, many of you are in the intelligence community, which means you are the focus of even more attention from the media and public. In other words, sometimes through no fault of your own, you know, bad things can happen to good employees. It's often a case of just kind of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So in the face of all this exposure in the workplace, how can a federal employee protect themselves? One answer, which is why we're here today for this webcast, is a professional liability insurance policy through Feds and GEBA. So the policies essentially, well, before I tell you about what the basic coverage areas are for the policy, the most important thing I want to emphasize right up here up front is that for federal managers, supervisors, and law enforcement officers, the agency is required to reimburse you for up to 1/2 of the cost of the insurance, okay? For certain intelligence agencies, which folks at the NSA and CIA, State Department may qualify for, it is 100% reimbursable. So what does this mean? Is this is an employee benefit, you know, that every member should be taken advantage of, okay? You wouldn't leave the 3% TSP match on the table. You also shouldn't leave this benefit on the table without serious consideration. So just a basic quick overview of what the policy provides. There are 3 basic coverage areas. The most important that I'm going to talk about is the administrative and disciplinary coverage, and I'll get into that a little bit later. The second area is lawsuits, personal capacity lawsuits. You don't have absolute immunity for these kinds of lawsuits, which you'll discuss. And then finally, everybody's favorite topic is criminal investigations and proceedings. Federal employees are often surprised to learn that they could be the subject of criminal investigations for simply doing their job. So before I jump into these three specific coverage areas, I do want to talk about the various positions that benefit the most from professional liability insurance. And the first is something that you all should be very familiar with. You know, anybody that's protecting our nation's security, intelligence community, you know, they have exposure, potential vulnerability. Anybody in federal law enforcement or a first responder, anybody who is managing or supervising employees is often at risk for employee complaints. Anybody who's making decisions on public policy or in the interests of the public has increased vulnerability. Any of these traditional professional services, such as medical or financial services, also have vulnerability. And finally, anybody who's doing any regulating products, entities, security matters, you know, these are the kind of common areas of federal employees that over the years we have found that have the most exposure. It's just an overview. It doesn't mean it's all inclusive. You know, it's just kind of a general, you know, sense, you know, that we've had over the years. So I want to jump into the first coverage area I want to discuss, which is civil lawsuits, because that's the one that affects your pocketbook. These lawsuits are called, you know, Bivens actions. That's a Supreme Court case, or personal capacity lawsuits, individual capacity lawsuits. It also includes lawsuits under the new Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which I think is important to talk about in light of the vaccine mandate. These kind of lawsuits generally involve some complicated legal principles. This is not law school. So for purposes of today's discussion, what I want you to take away from this is that you can be sued, you know, for doing your job. You can be sued for something that occurred within the scope of your employment. And what do we want to know if we get sued is who's going to represent us, okay? DOJ representation is not mandatory. It is not automatic. A lot of federal employees are surprised to learn that. It is a two-part test. Was it in the interest of the United States to provide the representation, you know, and were you in the scope of your employment? So when is it not in the interest of the United States to provide representation? What does that mean? It means whatever the Department of Justice wants it to mean. So the example I like to give, if you are being investigated for some sort of wrongdoing for the very same reason that you're being sued, the Department of Justice is not going to be on both sides of that. So they may decline representation. So you'll be on your own to hire a lawyer to have to represent you for one of these personal capacity lawsuits, and the cost of that can go up quickly. The second reason you want a PLI policy is this concept of immunity. So it doesn't matter who's representing you for one of these personal capacity lawsuits, Department of Justice, or private attorney, if they represent you and they lose the case, it is still against your pocketbook. It is still a personal capacity lawsuit against you. You do not have absolute immunity for these personal capacity lawsuits like you do for lawsuits under the Federal Tort Claim Act. So what does that mean? Is that you can be held liable for the actual judgment should DOJ decline to indemnify you. So what a policy does, it provides indemnity protection anywhere from $1 to $3 million, depending upon the limits that you purchased. The other thing that's important for these civil lawsuits is if DOJ, important component that we do here at Feds, is if DOJ is on the fence as to whether they'll provide representation, we will hire something that's called coverage counsel to hopefully go in there and convince DOJ that it is in the interest of the United States to provide representation. A quick thing I want to mention on the Religious Freedom Restoration Act for any of my managers who might be listening. As we all know, the vaccine mandate executive order has come down. and there's going to be job actions taken against federal employees who refuse to be vaccinated by November 22nd. If you are a manager and you deny somebody a religious accommodation, for example, or you have to take disciplinary action against them for refusing to get, vaccinated, you could face lawsuits under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. This is something that a policy would definitely protect you against, should the DOJ decline to represent you for that case. So just a real quick summary of civil here is you can be sued, DOJ can deny rep, and you can be held liable for a judgment. And I want you to take away that the liability insurance can protect you in these three major ways. It's a legal defense, which is very important, coverage counsel, which I talked about, and then finally, it actually pays damages. So that's civil. The next coverage area, which I've said I think is the real value of the policy for most federal employees. And this is coverage for what we call administrative matters, okay? So you would have access to a lawyer up to $200,000 for any one of these kinds of investigations. So OIG investigations, OSC, whistleblower retaliation investigations, any internal affairs, congressional investigations, which is a big deal. An employee files an EEO complaint against you. Any disciplinary proceeding, you would be appointed a lawyer, what I call cradle to grave, from the start of the investigation up until the conclusion of it. And in the unfortunate event you get a disciplinary action, we would defend. We would hire a lawyer to defend both at the agency level and any appeals that you're entitled to, if you're entitled to any of those outside of the agency, such as the MSPB. So I want to briefly just talk about some of these investigations and just give a little advice if you find yourself the subject of any of these. The first and the most serious is the IG investigation, okay? IG investigations are very serious. These are criminal investigators first, okay? They're statutory IGs. Most federal agencies have one, and they are criminal investigators first. So what does that mean? It means that not every request to be interviewed by the IG is a compelled one. Often they are voluntary. And submitting to a voluntary interview without the advice and counsel of a lawyer is essentially a waiver of your Fifth Amendment right. And that is just not something that you want to do without talking to a lawyer first. So IG investigations, you want to take them very seriously, and you want to talk to a lawyer if for no other reason to understand your rights, whether it is a compelled, required interview or whether it's a voluntary one. It's funny because what sounds worse is better. We want it to be compelled because that means you have use immunity for your testimony, cannot be used against you in a criminal matter. It can be used against you in an administrative or disciplinary matter, but not a criminal matter. We as lawyers worry about the 1% of the time things go wrong. So we want to always try to get these interviews to be in a compelled nature, and that's something that a lawyer can help you with. The next kind of investigation I want to talk about are Office of Special Counsel investigations, or OSC. OSC is a quasi-prosecutorial agency that investigates allegations of prohibited personnel practice. Big ticket one that they investigate are whistleblower reprisal investigations, okay? So OSC has the authority to prosecute independently of the employing agency. What does that mean? Is you as a manager can take an action against a problem employee. The employee could claim whistleblower retaliation. You took the action on advice and counsel with agency lawyers or employee relations, but OSC can still come in and say that that action still violated the Whistleblower Protection Act. And you could still be subjected to independent discipline from OSC. Remember, the agency lawyers that are representing the agency, their duty of loyalty is to the agency. So it's often important for these kinds of investigations, even though your interests and the agency's interests are often aligned, it's important for you to often have your own counsel, okay? And OSC will, obviously allow you to have a lawyer throughout the process and during the interview. The next kind of investigation I want to talk about are congressional investigations. Congressional inquiries, are just something else that you can be subjected to. And often it is the career executive that gets served up to testify to Congress for a particular matter. And you're definitely going to want, to have your own attorney. Having to testify on Capitol Hill, I assure you, is no picnic. It's downright terrifying for the average federal employee. And again, often it is that career civil servant, especially in the intelligence community, that gets served up to testify at Congress. If you remember back to the impeachment proceedings, those foreign service officers who had to testify, did not sign up to be a political pawn, in the impeachment hearings. They didn't want or need that 10 or 20 minutes of fame. So those who had a PLI policy in place, like we represented Ambassador Bill Taylor, the former ambassador to Ukraine, they were able to invoke their policies, get adequate legal preparation and help for their testimony. And those who didn't, and I spoke to a lot of those who didn't, had to scramble, and then find how they were going to afford the appropriate level of legal representation for that testimony. So, this is just another, important benefit that a PLI policy will provide. The final administrative investigation I want to talk about are EEO complaints. So if you're a manager, somebody files an EEO complaint against you, says you're the responsible management official, we will provide coverage for that as well. And often people will say to me, well, isn't that EEO complaint, isn't it against the head of the agency? Isn't it against the agency and not me personally? Can I, I can't be financially liable, right? Well, that is correct, okay? But you can be professionally liable in these EEO complaints. So, we like to be involved at the early stages so that we can provide advice along the way and potentially review your affidavits, explain to you the process, because often the EEO system operates independently than the interests of the manager, and no one really explains to you what your role is in the process. So we found it's important for us to give advice, even though the ultimate liability in any particular case will be the agency's. Again, if there is a finding of discrimination against the agency, okay, the agency is going to be under a tremendous amount of pressure to hold particular managers accountable and potentially take disciplinary actions against them. So we like to be involved at the earliest stages so that we can make sure that you're adequately establishing what's called that legitimate non-discriminatory reason for doing, whatever it is you did in a particular case or did not do. Okay, again, the agency lawyers, the agency's interests and your interests are often aligned. Okay, but again, the agency's lawyers, their duty of loyalty and their interest is absolutely to the agency and not necessarily to you individually. That's not to say we don't want you cooperating with agency counsel. We absolutely do. 9 times out of 10, your interests are aligned. We just found it's important for you to have somebody else, looking out for your interests. So again, for most federal employees, this is the real, value of a PLI policy, or these administrative protections, and you would have an attorney appointed to you to defend against the allegations, prepare you for any administrative or investigative process, attend the interview with you, and then obviously defend the action. Before I leave this section, I just want to briefly talk about accountability and blame, because that's really the name of the game these days. Whenever there is any significant event getting any type of media attention or involves an issue that's supercharged with public and human emotions, or even something seemingly minor getting the attention of your leadership, because it involves investigations from one of those entities we just talked about. I have often found that agencies look to assign blame quickly, in the hopes that the whole matter just kind of goes away. And when that happens, okay, when they're looking to do that, believe me, you're going to want to have an attorney or somebody, that's looking out, for your interest. I've often, I've represented, my 20, almost 30-year career representing federal employees on both sides of the fence. I'm often not amazed, but I think the employee, is frustrated and amazed that, they're very disappointed that the agency doesn't have their back, or they're just surprised. I mean, you are dedicated civil servants. You get up every day to do your job, to do it honestly, to do it ethically, to do it appropriately. And sometimes you make mistakes, and you're really taken aback, when the agency turns its back on you or wants to point its finger at you. And when that happens, it is very important for you to have your own legal counsel on your side. The final coverage area I want to talk about is criminal investigations. And when I start to talk about criminal investigations, people tend to gloss over because, again, you are dedicated civil servants. You did not get up this morning to violate criminal law. But what you need to appreciate is that there is very little that you can do wrong in the federal government and not also have it be a violation of Title 18, which is the criminal code. There are a lot of crimes in there that, such as unauthorized disclosure, conflict of interest, where their intent is not a prerequisite to prove it. So if you are a subject of a criminal investigation, whether it's an IG or some other criminal component, it is imperative that you have access to an attorney to defend or to represent you throughout that. And often, a quality criminal defense attorney can be really, really cost prohibitive. So those are the three coverage areas. I seem to have lost the webinar. Shelley or Greg, you there?
I'm here. I still see it on my screen.
So I've lost it. If you can just move, can you move it? Take it back to the next slide.
The next slide?
Yeah, it's just an overview. Here we go. I'm back, I think. You just click it. So this is just an overview of what the policy covers. 200,000 of administrative and disciplinary actions, lawsuits up to $1 to $3 million of coverage, full attorney's fees, and then $100,000 for criminal proceedings. Let me see if that works for me.
It should be back.
So if you
Tony.
just take it to the next slide for me.
All right.
Sorry.
No worries. Technology.
So these are just some unique features of the Feds Protection Program. Some of the big ones for you all, I would say, is there's worldwide coverage. You're covered anywhere in the world at no additional cost. Some of the other providers will charge extra for that. Employment practices liability is included at no additional cost. A lot of other providers charge extra for that. But the biggest thing, I think, is the quality of legal defense that you get. Our main panel counsel is Shaw, Bransford, and Roth, which for, well over, 3 decades has been the leader in representing federal employees, in this space. And then finally, let's look, it's our commitment and know-how. Like I said, I'm a former federal employee. I didn't leave a very successful law practice just to be an insurance agent. I'm really trying to run a program that does right by federal employees, and we're part of your community, and that's why we partnered up with GEBA, and we think that's why, GEBA has chose us over some of the other providers out there, is that, we really have a commitment to you, and, we know who you are, and we, know what you do, and I think that matters. It's more. You are more than just an insured member to us. Can we do the next slide, Greg? So this is just the cost. As I mentioned, early on, it's this is the discounted GEBA rate. That's all in $290. And if you're eligible for the reimbursement, which many of you are, that's $145 to you. So you can do the math on what that costs annually. It would cost more for you to sit down with the lawyer for an hour one time than what the policy costs, for the whole year. And with hourly rates going $400 or $500 and north from there for quality people, you can see how money quickly adds up, which goes back to the kind of example I tried to give at the beginning of the presentation, that if you have to spend $50, $100, $200,000 of your hard-earned money, take a loan against your TSP, that is going to affect your wealth. What Greg was talking about at the outset of the presentation. So let's move to the last slide here, Greg. If you just hit that a couple times. So this is sometimes the most important slide, because I can't tell you how many phone calls we receive from people who didn't have the policy in place, never thought they would need it, and that's kind of like the bar, I think, sometimes of federal employees deciding to buy the insurance is you don't think you're going to do anything wrong, and you don't think the agency is going to support you, but you need to have the policy in place before the claim or allegation happens. I can't tell you how many times people have called us, after, the house is on fire. Like, you can't get in a car accident on Monday and buy your insurance on Wednesday. The time to get your liability insurance is not after the National, Weather Service names the hurricane. So, it's easy to get enrolled. It takes less than 5 minutes. There's the website here, or if you have questions, you certainly, GEBA would welcome you to, call them. Really, it just takes a few minutes. I even had people who have told me, I've been to one of your presentations, one of your webinars, and I meant to sign up. I just never got around to it. So it's just very important that you have the policy in place before the allegation happens. I can't tell you how many times we get people calling us after. So that's the bulk of my presentation today. I guess I'll turn it over for questions.
All right. So Tony, at this point, nobody's asked any questions. You've done an excellent job explaining the ins and outs of this policy. So what we're going to do is we're going to wait for just a couple of minutes, see if any questions come in, and if not, we will we'll bid you good night. So I'm not sure if you covered it, Tony. How many feds do you currently help cover with professional liability insurance over at Feds?
So it's a proprietary number, but it's it's up there. It's tens and 20s of thousands. I mean, it's up there.
Yeah.
It's
size.
Yeah.
Nice. And if you can just remind our listeners, how long has Feds been in business?
So about 14 years this year.
Great.
And we are, by far, and I would say I started from, policy number one, and quickly we became I can say with absolute certainty that we are the leading provider. We have the most insureds and most premium out of any of the other providers out there. I can't put that out there. We quickly, became the leader, and I think that's in large part of us just kind of, doing it the right way, and frankly, good old fashioned customer service. And again, back to that, what I call that commitment and know-how.
Yeah. Now, are there any parts of your policy that you think set you apart from the other PLI providers?
I mean, most of the coverages are the same. I will tell you, some of the limits are differently. Some of the sub-limits are capped, at the, with the other providers that I think, we have a higher advantage with. But the core, the core coverages are basically the same. to be fair. And I would encourage people, who are evaluating and trying to make a decision, to call us up, call GEBA up, call the others up, ask them questions, and see what kind of answers you get. I mean, I would just say this. I mean, we are endorsed, by GEBA, obviously, and all the leading federal employee associations. The Federal Law Enforcement Officers Association, Federal Managers Association, Senior Executives Association, federal, the National Association of United States Attorneys. I can go on and on and on. I would just suggest that there's a reason for that, but you should do your own research, and ask questions.
All right, great. Yep. So it looks like that about covers it. As I mentioned before the Tony got started. Again, my name is Greg Klingler. I'm the Director of Wealth Management. And the reason why I'm even on this call is to talk about how professional liability insurance and risk mitigation fits into every aspect of your financial life. This isn't just a one-shot, buy this product because other people are doing it. This is part of your financial plan. This is mitigating risk that you can very easily and very cheaply mitigate in a very easy way that a lot of other federal employees do in the exact same way. We've seen people go through the hard times. I think, Tony, you mentioned once the fire starts, you can't go back in time. That's exactly one of those things. That's exactly one of the things that we talk about when it comes to insurance. We hope we never have to use it, but if it happens, the insurance is there to protect you. And for that fee and what it protects from an income standpoint, from a liability standpoint, it can absolutely make sense. It looks like we don't have any additional questions, but as you can see from the last slide, it does show you how you can contact us. And if we can't answer that question, we can definitely pass you over to Tony, who's definitely more than capable of answering those questions. Tony, anything else to add?
Nope. Thanks. I want to thank GEBA for the opportunity again.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming on. I know you have a lot of different choices with where you can spend your time, Tony. So I appreciate you spending your time with us and helping our members. For those of you who attended the seminar, for those of you who attended the seminar, thank you very much. We know that you have options as well. We think this is a very important topic. Before you leave, do me a favor and fill out the survey before you log out. That survey will definitely help us understand what your goals are and hopefully make better presentations for the future. That's always the goal. We want to make ourselves better. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Tony, thank you for your time, and we'll talk soon.
You bet. Thanks again.